And our next presenter, Mark Busse, we actually met at the hairdresser, right, Mark? Mark is the director of, I don't know what you're laughing about. Mark is the director of creativity and engagement at HCMA Architects and Design. That's the architectural firm that actually designed our community center here, and which we're so proud of, and which is award-winning. And we have a lot of respect for that firm. But he's not a designer, and he's not an architect. He's a communications strategist who, through HCMA's Tilt Curiosity Labs initiative, we're going to hear more about that, is using design and creativity as catalysts for positive change while serving communities. He is host of Creative Mornings Vancouver and Interesting Vancouver, both of which I hope we hear more about tonight.
Okay, are you ready for something completely different? Are ya? All right. Speaking of aging in place, it occurs to me that I've known Michael for a long time, but it occurred to me tonight earlier, we've known each other for we're coming up to 30 years.
Yes.
Oh boy. Okay, good evening, thank you for having me. Thank you both, those were amazing. I am not a planner, I am not an architect, but unlike, contrary to what Jess said earlier, I am indeed a designer. I'm actually a fellow of the Graphic Designers of Canada and have been a strategist and brand specialist and engagement specialist and process designer for a very long time. I managed my own strategic and brand communications firm for 20 years, the last decade of which specialized in AEC, architecture, engineering, construction, and the related marketplace in the built environment. I really have a passion for helping organizations thrive and have impact in the world. But I confess, and with apologies to the architects in the room, and I'm a little bit nervous because I didn't know that one of the partners from my firm was going to be showing up tonight. I learned that architects, whom I've worked so much with, aren't always so terrific at a few things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. They're not awesome at truly understanding and prioritizing the audiences that they serve often. They're not awesome at thinking beyond their training and traditions. And they're not terribly keen to take big risks creatively or admit that they don't have all the answers or sometimes even listen very well. So, if we got that out of the way, Stuart, are you cool? Okay. You got any problem with that? Okay. If you had told me a few years ago that I was going to be part of the leadership team of a approaching 45-year-old architecture firm, I would have laughed out loud. Now, indulge me for a minute. I'm going to play a video for you that will set the stage and some context, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. Actually, before I do that, sorry, I forgot there's another slide I added here with a particularly heinous image for the planners. It was actually at a community open house, not dissimilar to this, felt very similar actually, when things started to change for me in my own career path. And there was a question from a concerned citizen about a particular project, to which the architect, whose work I respected and I worked for their firm, essentially said something along the lines of, look, there are complex factors at play here. So we'll tell you what the future of your community is. And all the air left the room. And I realized that that was, for me, antithetical to how I believe the relationship between designer and end user should be. And flash forward a few years, and here I am, part of an architecture team that does community work. But we'll come back to that later. What I wanted to do tonight is to share a few stories. I was challenged by the organizers to talk about creativity and community and some of the sort of rogue notions and approaches that we're taking as a firm, because we're sort of trying to bust the model of what architecture is and the way we show up in the world. So again, here's this video that I want to show you, and then we'll come back. So I'll see you in a minute and a half.
Tilt is our curiosity labs. It's the place where we've given ourselves permission to explore and to investigate and to be provocative. So it's a place where we're asking questions of ourselves and asking questions of the community.
IDS West Stage was an example of that because what it did was allow us to play in a sandbox that we normally haven't had the chance to play in before.
How does space affect us in the way we move? It's a really interesting question, and I think that's really at the heart of architecture.
The Artist in Residence program creates an environment of collaboration. This lets us ask questions that reshapes how we see the world today.
What stands out from her experience here is just how disruptive and inspiring something as different as what she did.
It was one of those aha moments where we said, that's exactly why we're doing this. It's exactly why we are investing our energy and our time in having these types of conversations. We're a firm full of very creative people. The energy that comes from putting it all together like this is really quite phenomenal.
Everyone in this room is stoked to have an amazing day at Tilt City.
Oh yeah!
The name Tilt City is really about looking at particular parts of the city. What else could this be? What else could exist here?
We could get people to believe that something temporary and ephemeral could even have a permanent impact.
The problems that we deal with are highly complex and involve a whole array of human emotions and conditions and systems. Traditionally, we've applied overly simplistic ways of understanding and influencing those. So this is a way of trying to break down those overly simplistic ways of looking at problems and understand them from a much broader range of perspectives. It's really about bringing a broader array of thinking and expertise into our work. So at our core, we can improve the services that we're offering to our clients and make a bigger difference in our community.
The world is full of good ideas, but crucial to maximizing our social impact is really understanding the world that is. Then we can collectively dream about a world that could be, frame those ideas and move them forward. That is Tilt. Okay, I don't have a lot of time. I have about 12 minutes left, so I'm not here to pitch HCMA. You all know who we are, but I feel I was told to kind of go with the assumption you wouldn't know much about my reality and what we do, so I am going to give you a quick flight just for 2 minutes. My firm is a young firm at heart, although it is in its 5th decade. About half of our firm are female, which is amazing, in the architecture sector, and 30% of our firm are international, and we're growing rapidly. When I started working for them a decade ago, there were 30-ish people, and we're heading towards 100 people, which is amazing. We have an office in downtown Vancouver, a smaller office in Victoria, and our headquarters in downtown are a modern studio environment. You're all invited to come and check it out. One thing to note about this studio space, these offices, is that it is built around a central core that is made for community. Our architecture studio, at any particular week, if you pop by in the evening, you might see a dance class or a nude model standing in the middle and a life drawing session occurring, or a workshop being hosted with a community group, or a fundraiser gala in the middle of our studio. Pretty unusual for architects to do, I can tell you. I've worked for 22 different firms, and I've never seen that ever. We do a lot of things. We do pools. We do a lot of pools. We do schools. We do a lot of schools. We do public safety buildings for cities. Arts and culture buildings. I told you I was going to go fast, right? But our passion lies in community. If we get to do something for a municipality, our hearts sing. We've done a lot of different types of libraries and art centers and rec centers and what have you. This particular building is one of ours, of course, as mentioned earlier. We're proud of it. We're proud of the way that the community center has been adopted and activated by this community. But I'll confess that planning and designing a building of this nature and complexity wasn't an easy task for us. And we encountered, as all architects and designers would, resistance and pushback from members of this community during the build. I was around working as a consultant for the firm at the time, and I remember all of it. We really had but look at what it's become. Like look what it's become. It's something, we had to really work hard to listen. We had to really challenge ourselves. We focused on the space between and not necessarily the hard programmatic specifics of the boxes that were rooms. And we designed something that I would call a community hub. So this has been an amazing place for us to return to over the last, 9 years already, isn't it? Wow. And we've done a lot of study and measured, and we're really, really happy to hear accounts from many who said that they come now to the center for just hanging out or to loiter and to meet their friends, and it's a beautiful space with flow and air, and it actually functions very, very well as an activated space. We're really proud of that. That, for me, is a very high social impact moment for us in our career, and we learned a lot that we extracted from this, which is now what I'm going to talk about. In the architecture business, we spend a lot of time focused on economics. I could restate that and say, in the real estate and development business, we spend a lot of time on economics. We also spend a lot of time, as you heard earlier, talking about environmental sustainability. We will go on and on about LEED this and passive house that and living building this and the other, and we're proud of that, and it's important. It's absolutely crucial. But that's about the scale that social sustainability and social impact gets. If that was a three-legged stool, that sucker's fallen over. And we're done. As a firm, we are, from top to bottom, we're finished. It is time, something has to change. So how do you measure social impact is the problem. This is not taught to us in school. This is not easily quantified, these notions of measuring social system. How do you measure joy? How do you measure happiness and laughter? We think you can. But what lessons can we learn from buildings like this and others, and extract those and perhaps think of them in a framework so that we can show up in community and start to apply some metrics that feel more science-based than just some architect telling you that's just the way, that's good design, that's good form, right? So this triggered a challenging form of inquiry for our firm, and we've been on this journey now for a decade, and it's really come to a head in the last few years. We started by looking at some research and some experimenting with various sustainability frameworks, this one by Professor Tim Dixon, which connects various themes from engaging and living and working and so on to objectives like equity, inclusion, adaptability, and security. Now, this captures the idea really well and the interdependence of these pieces, but it's complicated, and again, it's hard to apply. So we reverse engineered our own framework that we call the Social Sustainability Framework. And our engagement and collaborative process allows us to use those notions of equity and inclusion and security and adaptability to come to an agreed set of principles and guidelines when we're working in the built space, especially for community, when social is so important. Since adopting this approach, we continue to make investments and continue the work. We have full-time staff working on this, developing process and soup to nuts type end-to-end measurements so we can understand what works and what doesn't, and reapply that back to our design process so that every single project is better than the last. Our true hope, though, is that the rest of the industry, and the reason that I'm sharing this with you today, and it will hopefully get out into the industry and motivate others in our industry to adopt this and join us. Much like during the green building movement, there was this groundswell, and the industry changed. We want to develop a shared language of social impact. Our profession, our cities, our society demands us to do better. We have to get beyond old ways of thinking, get creative, and we have to serve community. So this is this is a working model of the way we used to be, and if there's other architects in the room, this might sting a little, and the way we are trying to show up in the world now. We're calling this a path to transformed practice. It's a journey of discovery, but it's a shift in how we practice, sending crisscrossing lines of communication and collaboration out into the community, not our community, the community, instead of conventional practice that relies on silos and strict chains of command. Instead of just the physical construct of the final outcome of our work, we also look at the social construct we're helping to build. Any project of ours that ends at the property line is a failure. We want to know that we've touched the community and changed it for the better, improving quality of life. And this means a new definition of profit and values. Values to values. requiring a new commitment to creative exploration and community service in how we operate on a daily basis. Now, you're just a bunch of people, and I'm assuming you're not architects, but you need to trust me on this one. This is radical in the architecture business. This is nonsense. They think we're nuts. How is that going to work? So what we did is we took a look at the core of our practice, which was, capital A architecture, and we realized that that's not going to work anymore. We needed to layer on something more. So we made a commitment. We actually renamed the firm Architecture Plus Design, and Plus Design is an expression of our commitment to interdisciplinarity, the opportunities to become more comprehensively enabled to do all of that stuff that for years firms like ours have been farming out, not doing, and focusing on specialty and narrowing our influence. We now have a fairly robust staff of industrial design, strategists, engagement professionals, communication designers. Like we're not just architecture anymore, and it's increasingly become the norm that we're just sort of an interdisciplinary practice of integrated design. And the magic moment for us was when we created Tilt Curiosity Labs, which you saw the video earlier, and I'll talk a little bit of a few case studies from that to just give you a sense. And hopefully my job tonight is just to kind of rattle your cage a little bit, make you think about how this relates to Ambleside and West Van and your community and its future, and maybe some of the energies and focus that you can apply in that process. So we started asking ourselves questions like, what if we could tilt our perspective just for a moment? What might we see differently? How might that difference change everything for us in the way that we show up and in our practice? And what we discovered was that Tilt could be embedded throughout the entire firm. We constantly shift our perspective during the design process. And Tilt Curiosity Labs is where we extend this beyond the architecture practice into the world around us, where we take creative risks, and where we have the freedom to fail. Think about that. The freedom to fail. Architects aren't allowed to fail. We're liable for life. Things don't fail in our world. So this is really a new thing for us. Tilt reminds us to explore and to be curious, question conventions, make connections with people and communities in ways that just don't happen unless someone creates the space for it. In the simplest form, as I said in that video earlier, Tilt is a lens or a frame through which we can view the world that really is, so we can collectively dream about a world that could be. Okay. Part of this was mentioned, the Creative Mornings. How many of you have been to Creative Mornings? One person. Creative Mornings is a monthly, free breakfast lecture series in 180 cities around the world, 64 countries. We have in Vancouver alone 10,000 people on the opt-in mailing list, keen to get in the room. We only allow about 200 and change for dialogue and discovery and inspiration around creativity. Not just graphic designers, not just artists, not just filmmakers, but creativity. Every one of you struggles with creativity. Every one of you possesses some amount of creativity and applies it in your life. If we were able to talk about that, what could we learn from each other? It's much more than a sage on the stage event, although we get a lot of sages on stages. we had a lot of famous people and a lot of not so famous people sharing their stories. But it's more about an exchange of ideas, sometimes rooted in uncomfortable topics. We relish this. We welcome this. As architects, as designers, as members of our community, we want to get very comfortable being uncomfortable, not always feeling like we have all the answers. I took this for you the other week, just so you could hear how our events sound. By the way, that's John Flugog, who was the speaker, sitting amongst the public, talking about what he just spent 25 minutes sharing with the crowd. These have proven to be very, very powerful learning moments for us as hosts, as collaborators, as members of the community, and many opportunities have come from this type of activity. It's a really interesting format, and I'd love to do it here. It would be great. Before you ask us questions, everybody just turns around and for 10 minutes talks to each other about what you heard, didn't hear, hated, loved, want to ask, and then have dialogue. But that is my want. This is not my event. Another community event we produce, of course, mentioned earlier, was Interesting Vancouver, an annual gathering which rejects narcissism, which is running amok in my city. I don't know about over here, but in Vancouver, oh my God. Speaker events and the TED thing. Oh yeah, TED's actually run from West Van. Are any TED people in the room? Oh, anyway, to hell with polish. We're interested in authenticity, creativity, vulnerability. This is what we invite. So we invite people with really sort of disparate, unusual things going on in their lives to talk about them and to ultimately sort of create the version of ourselves as a community that we're most proud of. We don't get to see every day, but the one we really, what is diversity if not something we can model in our behavior? What is creativity if not something that we can identify and point to? So we try to pull this out, put it on stage, talk about it. It started very humble. There were 100 of us and a basket of apples. A bit of advice for those of you who are aspiring event producers. If you're going to have people speaking in public, don't hand apples to the audience. That did not go over well. It was not good. Now it's a much larger event. It's very popular. Note the living room setup on stage. The MC, which changes every year. I do not MC this event. I produce it. Engages the speakers as they come in series, in conversation with each other and then with the audience. Again, tremendous learning opportunities for us about hosting and challenging norms. This was my favorite speaker. We are in our 10th year, it's our 10th anniversary this year. We've had famous actors and politicians and all kinds of people confess to their passions and obsessions, and individuals who are often overlooked share extraordinary lives and skills with a really eager audience yearning to touch and learn and experience and try new things, hobbies and obsessions, whatever. This young man, does everybody know who that is? It's Robert Gagnon. And a couple years ago, he stood on stage. He has fairly severe autism. He is a very uncomfortable person by our social norms. And yet he bravely stood in front of 450 people and shared his passion for playing pinball games at a competitive level. He's now the world champion pinball. Champion. The world pinball champion. What? Just a guy in Vancouver who would never have had an opportunity to be a whole person and loved by a room of 450 people. For us as designers, that's a really magical moment because we get to literally understand what you were talking about earlier about inclusivity. We can model inclusivity and practice that. We also had a very impressive, well-spoken Indo-Canadian military person on stage a couple years ago. Now he's the Canadian Minister of Defense. He talked about ripples. It's a good video. Watch it. We didn't know he was going to politics. It was just really interesting. Get it? This time of year, interesting becomes a word I really loathe using. By the way, it is the 10th anniversary, as I said, and the event is this Friday. Anybody who wants tickets to this one, if you use the code COMMUNITY, you'll get $10 off the ticket. You can just go to interestingvancouver.com and join us. There's enough left, I think, to fit some of you. Anyway, that's this Friday. You saw Tilt City earlier. This was we partnered with SFU Public Square. We brought a couple hundred creative citizens together for one day downtown and formed them into guerrilla teams. We put a designer on every team to facilitate. They chose random locations a short walk away in the urban core, studied their location, and then they made an intervention, an art installation, whatever, a creation on their site. Short term, one business day to imagine it, execute, document, and report back. It was amazing. This is my favorite. It's called The Neighborhoodie. They used their budget, which was like $30, because there was random budgets for each team, and they bought a piece of cloth, and they made one giant sweater, and just strangers would come in and like, hey, who are you? And for an afternoon, this corner was transformed. There's 20 other examples. There's a short documentary on our YouTube channel. Go to HCMA on YouTube, you'll find it. It's really worth watching. It's fantastic. So many lessons learned about how we could creatively become community, enact community, challenge community, and just in a sort of guerrilla fashion, take over our space and make it what we want, even if just for a minute. But do these things lead somewhere? You bet they do. Harbor Deck, which you saw in the video earlier, I really wanted to just, if you don't know about this project, I want to tell you about this. This was no client, no budget, just a zany idea that we had as a team. It's a Tilt initiative. We thought, what's possible for our waterfront? Because we do a lot of water-based stuff. We're the pool people, after all, right? But why is it that our seawall around Vancouver tends to function more like a walking track? There's how many, if you can, in your mind, walk the entire seawall of Vancouver, how many spots are there where you can dip your toe in the water? 2? Like, it's not meant to be inviting. And we are a city that has very little town square, convening space. There's no land for it. Come on, the museum, give me a break. The big gallery. What if we put people first? What if the seawall wasn't a wall at all? What if it invited people into or onto the water? That's one of North America's busiest harbors, right? And fully allowed, fully within all of the constraints of the problem, we thought, well, couldn't this be a place for people to convene, to hang out, maybe to swim, maybe to wade, maybe to launch a kayak? We called it Harbor Deck. This may not get built, but I can tell you we're getting offers from developers that are very interested. You know what a CAC is, a community amenity contribution? They want to break some rules with their developments. This thing's starting to look pretty appealing to them, and it was so fascinating when we just gave this away and said this would be great. They do it in Europe. There's not one in North America, not one. Ambleside could be the first Harbor Deck in North America. What? It would take some boldness on the community's part, though, wouldn't it? One more example. If you've seen any of the coverage of Alley-Oop, the pink and yellow transformed activated laneway in Vancouver, that was us. We had this idea, like why are lanes so ignored? There was a survey that was spawned by the whole loneliness and isolation thing. And the number one thing that kept coming up, there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to activate, there's nowhere downtown to host stuff, to be. And 30, we did the study. We thought this was a good idea, let's study this. 30% of the hardscape in downtown Peninsula of Vancouver is laneways, used about 3% of the time. What do you mean there's no land? That's public space. So we challenged ourselves to reimagine what one would look like in the financial district, an area devoted to work, that could introduce a little play, right? The antithesis of work. We didn't want to overwhelm the concept or turn it into something that it wasn't. We just wanted something that was missing. It actually doesn't hurt that this was 1 block from our office. So we partnered with the Downtown Business Improvement Association and then with the city, who both loved it. We studied, we ate lunch there, we played in them, we counted the people in them. We learned that there was a lot more vehicles than people. Most of the people were men, and most of the men were just passing through. We talked intensively with homeless people who used our Target alley as a thoroughfare and a way station. We talked with businesses that were kind of wary at first, and it turns out that don't really like it when you put a basketball hoop outside of your window of your office. See, iterative design, we're learning. Then we engaged creativity and we went to work. We added colorful coats of paint, markings suggesting areas for urban sport, a few basketball hoops, and wrappings for the cafe at either end of the laneway, very European style, and voila. The change was as dramatic as it was immediate. It suddenly became a space crammed with people, workers taking a break, commuters playing a pickup game with people they just met, people who wouldn't make eye contact at a bus stop laughing and playing together. It became part of the community. The local language school had started doing their phys ed programming in the alley every Thursday. There were kids coming and playing, strangers coming by and talking about what had happened in the space. It took Instagram by storm. Last week, a video was released by a K-pop group. I can't remember the name of them. The song's called Likey Likey. Don't watch it. It'll burn into your brain and you'll be singing it for days. Don't watch it. 30 million views in 4 days. Shot in the alley. Who knew? We put a stake in the ground. This is now people territory. And we learned some interesting things. Remember, this is all about study and learning, right, for us? We went back, we actually measured the statistics. And what we discovered was very surprising. The foot traffic tripled. Tripled. Simply because of this small intervention. And people weren't just traveling through, they were spending time in the space. We also discovered that the ratio of female pedestrians went up by 50%, which was really satisfying for us. But the most important lesson for us was that if you change the way you look at space around you, putting people at the heart of things, you can have a disproportionately large impact with small changes. It doesn't have to be big. It does not have to be expensive. However, at the beginning of the project, I and my colleagues were very wary of notions of gentrification. Even though we're in the financial district, if we prettied up an alley, what happens to the homeless that are in that alley? Well, this is my friend Rob, the binner, whom I met in the alley after it was done, who went on and on about how he's lived 20 years in that alley and others downtown, and it is far and away the best thing that's ever happened to him. People talk to him, children engage him in conversation, people give him food. He pulled a banana out of a bin one day when I was walking by. He goes, "Look, a banana, totally perfect banana." Now, that is one anecdote. I have 10 more that I can tell you, but I can say that in many ways, we have improved the quality of this environment for the homeless. There are more there, and I saw a homeless guy with a shopping cart having a basketball game with a young lady. When does that happen in an urban context? So this has been really interesting for us. Was there an architectural client involved? Did we get paid? Did we stamp drawings on this? Some of those skills were applied. Many more lessons went into our studio about how we can insert ourselves into community than we got to do as an architecture firm. So the lesson here is that cities don't just belong to people. When we talk about building cities and activating public space for cities, I think we really need to remember that cities belong to all people. Certainly is true here in the context that you're dealing with. We have another one called Ackery's Alley. We have a third on the way too. This one's being built. This is now being transformed into a micro performance space in a dingy alley with an permanent interactive art installation in the alley, which was amazing. It's right behind the Orpheum, between Granville Street and Seymour, right there. It's been painted. It's amazing. It should be open in, give us a month and a half, maybe, mid-December, and you'll be able to go and check it out yourself. I hope you'll come. If I had more time tonight, I would tell you about how this intersection of creativity and community and public space has allowed us as a firm to dramatically improve our community and stakeholder engagement process and the positive impact that has had in our design process and the built environment. It's been interesting to dig deeply into this space, and discover opportunities for creativity and community, as well as the inherent fears and cynicism that we encounter when the words public engagement are said together. And I hope that that's not going to happen here with the Ambleside project. You get a lot of eye rolls. Oh, engagement, here we go again. A terrific example for us of how we've harnessed the power and potential of engagement is a current project we're working on in Surrey for the rapidly growing Clayton Heights neighborhood, which had a little news lately, right? That brings together a library, an arts center, and a rec center, all on a campus. Originally conceived as 3 separate buildings, 3 different budgets, 3 different staff, 3 different governance structures, into one community hub, one structure, one shared resource space with a beautiful, beautiful design concept. This was in direct response to community impact through an effective engagement process that we led. Our team created the name, the brand, the strategy, the messaging, and led the engagement process with the city, and it bore so much fruit. And this is a city that, until this year, had not really done engagement. They could barely keep up with the construction to keep up with their population. So this has been really rewarding. There's a piece that I borrow from Stanley King, some of you know, that I love. This is the 24-hour cycle where we put this on the wall, and from sunup to sunrise, back to sunup again. What are all that we get citizens like you to imagine literally all the possible ramifications of way that space could be used in a place. Then we do it again over 12 months. What could happen in a courtyard outside in July that couldn't happen in June or in November? And this led to an entire idea concept that drove this. This is happening now. If anybody wants to come by and see it, we'd be happy to show you the models. It's extraordinary. It's heading to construction. So I'll wrap up by just circling back to that tipping point when I mentioned earlier about knowing, who says what the plan for the community is. These days, I feel really, really good about working in the architecture sector, especially in a young city in ascension, like Vancouver and its region, you included, West Vancouver, that desperately needs a better approach and a braver, more involved, more informed citizens helping shape its future. So my challenge for you tonight is this. Think big. Consider ways you can explore the intersection of creativity and community, and try hard to go beyond who gets to say what, and explore what's possible for creating lasting legacy for Ambleside and West Vancouver. Think about the legacy you want to create and leave behind, and then you tell them what you want for your community. There's a lot more to the story, a lot. I could talk for hours. And I'd be happy to talk more with anybody who's interested, but I'll leave it with this so we can get on with the dialogue. We're working hard to look outside our own practice and challenge our own assumptions. And we're willing to admit that we don't have all the answers. Okay? So on behalf of all the architects, licensed and otherwise, in my firm, we do not have all the answers. But this frees us up to ask the question, what else is possible? And I encourage you to borrow from this thinking and apply it as you ponder your own process in the future of this community. Thank you for giving me the time to share this with you, and thank you to the organizers and my fellow panelists, and I'll turn it over to Jess.